Most things we own today are designed to die. Do you agree? Just think about all the stuff you bought last year. How many of your clothes or shoes do you think will survive the next 5 years? Today's sneakers are basically held together by prayers and glue. Most of your clothes and shoes will fall apart after 5 washes. We are so used to everything being so disposable that we don't even question it anymore. This was not always the case. Before the rise of fast fashion, clothes could be in the closet for 150 years and still be cool as fuck. In fact, many clothes got even better the more beat up they were. The Levi 501 is the perfect example of a fit getting fresher, getting better with age. To really understand why the 501 is such a big deal, we have to go back to 1873. At this time, if you were a miner or a laborer in the American West, your pants were your biggest enemy. You were doing back-breaking work, shoveling dirt, hauling rocks, and the stress of this kind of activities on the fabric were insane, especially the pockets and the base of your fly. Those areas kept on ripping constantly. Imagine your pants splitting through the middle in the middle of a shift. Then enter Jacob Davis. He was a tailor in Reno, and he had a customer who was sick of her husband's pants falling apart. Jacob then had a light bulb moment. He took the metal rivets he used for horse blankets and punched them right into the corners of the pockets. It worked. Suddenly, the fabric didn't rip apart. But Jacob was a tailor. He was not a tycoon. He was not a businessman in the sense of the word. He did not have the $68 needed to file a patent. What did Jacob do? He wrote a letter to his fabric supplier in San Francisco, a guy named Levi Strauss. Levi saw the potential immediately. So on May 20th, 1873, they got the patent for improvements in fastening pocket openings, and the blue jean was officially born. But back then, they weren't called jeans, they were called waist overalls. And they looked a lot different than the ones you're wearing right now. They only had one back pocket, a cinch in the back to tighten the waist because belt loops didn't exist yet, and a watch pocket for, well, your pocket watch. The genius of the 501 was that it solved problems workers were having. Even the indigo dye wasn't just because it looked cool. Indigo sits on the outside of the yarn rather than soaking all the way through. So as the fabric is rubbed against rock and dirt, the indigo would wear off, but the structural integrity of the cotton stayed strong. It was the first smart workwear. By 1890, the patent was about to expire, which meant that everyone started using rivets. To stay ahead, Levi officially gave their top-tier denim the lot number 501. They also added the iconic 2-horse leather patch to the back. They did this because a lot of their customers were immigrants who didn't speak English well. But everyone understood the image of 2 horses trying to rip a pant apart. It was a flex. It told the world, yeah, the other guys have rivets now, but they don't have this particular denim. What are you eating? This was the moment the 501 stopped being just a tool for miners and people who did hard labor. This was when they started becoming a brand. By the time we hit the early 1900s, the 501 was already a legend in the West, but the next few decades were where it really started to look like the jeans we know today. In 1922, Levi made a massive move. They added belt loops. Before that, everyone just wore suspenders or used the cinch in the back to keep the pants up. But fashion was shifting. Guys wanted to wear belts. So Levi just added the loops alongside the old suspender buttons. Then, in 1936, Levi introduced the iconic red tab. Other companies were starting to copy the stitching on the back pocket, and Levi needed a way to make sure people knew they were buying the real deal. It was a simple little ribbon of red fabric sewn into the pocket, but it changed everything. It was the first time a piece of clothing had a logo you could spot from a mile away. Then came World War II. The government basically told every company, stop wasting material. We need the thread and metal for the war. Levi had to gut the company to comply. They ripped off the back cinch, removed the rivets from the watch pockets, and my personal favorite, they stopped stitching the arcuate, that double arc design on the back pocket. But the brand didn't want to lose its identity, so they literally had factory workers paint the arches on with orange paint. It was a total hack, but it worked. They even had to swap their custom branded buttons for generic L'Oreal leaf buttons, which were the standard issue hardware at the time. What is wild is that these wartime S501 models, the S stood for simplified. They are now one of the most expensive and rare jeans for collectors. Up until this point, if you were wearing 501s, it meant you were working. You were a farmer, a mechanic, or a guy on a construction site. But in the 1950s, the 501 went from being a tool to being a statement. It became the uniform of the outsider. It all started with Hollywood. You had guys like Marlon Brando in The Wild One and James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause. They were wearing cuffed 501s, white t-shirts and leather jackets. They were putting that shit on. To the parents of the 1950s, this was terrifying. It looked greasy, it looked dangerous, and most importantly, it looked like you didn't care about following the rules. This created a massive cultural divide. Schools across America actually started banning blue jeans. They saw denim as a gateway to juvenile delinquency. And as we know, the second you tell a teenager that they can't wear something, it becomes the only thing they ever want to wear. The 501 became the official flag of the youth revolution. But it wasn't just the bad boys in movies. Around the same time, you had the beatniks, the poets, and the artists in New York and San Francisco. They loved the 501 because it was authentic. They wanted something that felt real, something that had a history of honest work behind it. This era also gave us the shrink to fit ritual. Back then, denim was raw. It hadn't been pre-washed or pre-distressed in a factory. So guys would buy their 501s 2 sizes too big, sit in a hot bathtub for an hour wearing them, and then let them dry on their bodies. The jeans would shrink and mold to their specific frame. It made the relationship with your pants personal. They weren't just a pair of 501s, they were your own pair of 501s. As much as we loved the 501s, even Levi knew they couldn't just coast on one pair of pants forever. By the late 60s, the world was changing fast. You had the summer of love, rock stars were becoming the new gods, and people wanted something a little more streamlined. That is when the 505 comes in. Released in 1967, the 505 was basically the 501's younger rock and roll cousin. The biggest difference was that it had a zipper. Purists might have hated it, but zippers were absolutely necessary. You didn't want to be fumbling with buttons all the time. Zippers made it easy to open and close your fly. The 505 had a slightly slimmer leg and a lower rise, and it became the go-to for the punk scene. If you look at the cover of the Rolling Stones Sticky Finger or a photo of the Ramones, you are looking at the 505. In 1962, they dropped the Type 3 trucker jacket, and if you've ever owned a piece of denim in your life, it was probably a copy of this one. Before this, denim jackets were kind of boxy and looked like something a train conductor would wear. The Type 3 changed the game with those iconic V-seams on the front and a much more tailored fit. Between the 501 and the trucker jackets, Levi had successfully built a uniform that worked for everyone, from hippies in San Francisco to truckers in Texas. Then you've got the more fashion-forward experiments like Levi's star-pressed trousers. This was released in the 1960s for the guys who wanted to feel Levi's vibe but needed to look a bit more sharper for a date or a job. They were made with a permanent crease, so they never needed ironing. What's really wild about this era is how Levi used the other releases to protect the 501 by having the 505 for the rockers and the star-pressed for the preppy kids. The 501 was allowed to stay pure. It remained the classic, the original, the gold standard. By the time the 70s rolled around, Levi was a global empire that defined what casual meant. They had a piece of clothing for every version of masculinity that existed, and every single one of them can be traced back to those copper rivets from 1873. At the end of the day, the 501 changed the menswear industry because it gave us a forever item. So go find a pair, break them in, make them yours. Every other pair of jeans is just trying to find a shortcut to where the 501 already is.